Hi, everybody. Um, I'm actually coming back to add this to the beginning of an episode that I recorded yesterday on Friday. Shortly thereafter, found out about the passing of Ruth Bader Ginsburg. And given what you're about to hear in the episode, I felt that I should come back, even though I'm wearing the same clothes and everything, come back and really speak to what she means and to me, and then ultimately reinforcing why we need to vote. Um, President Obama said in his statement that women and equality is not an abstract ideal. It doesn't just harm women; it harms all of us. And that Ruth Bader Ginsburg saw that on women's equality in the same way that Thurgood Marshall saw on racial equality. At least that's how I feel. Um, it's tough. It's tough to stress the importance of the Supreme Court uh, to lay people. I mean, as I always say, I'm not an attorney, but constitutional law is the bedrock of all law and our society. And these seemingly ivory tower academic assessments, they seem abstract. Um, they seem beyond comprehension to most, but they so matter more than you may know. And so, to me, the Supreme Court is the penultimate memorialization of where history will judge our path and our direction. And it's going to be important to vote based off of just that alone. Um, where is history going to judge the direction that we chart over the next generation? Because these are lifetime appointments, and largely the Supreme Court is the crafter of progress and can halt uh, and reverse centuries of unfairness. And where are we going to be judged in this moment? It's going to be a dogfight. I fully anticipate that this Senate is going to try and confirm a nominee that President Trump puts forward. Um, I expect nothing less, and so we need to make sure we're out there in the good fight as Ruth Bader Ginsburg was, the notorious RGB. Um, it's tough to put it into words because I've long believed that I will have a daughter. I've I've had that feeling. My friends know. I just anticipate it. Um, I anticipate that I will have beautiful, strong black daughters who will face headwinds that I, as a male, don't understand. And I lived in a house full of males for the majority of my life, and so I've always had a soft spot and felt the need to um, be an ally to women's rights. Um, Up until I started working at Walmart, um, all but one of my direct supervisors were women, capable, strong women who've taught me a lot. So it's not phony when I say and when I believe that women are capable of doing anything we're capable of doing because I've seen it. And the person that you see today has largely been shaped, yes, by my brother and my father, but by women. And Ruth Bader Ginsburg was an inspiration to women, but to allies like myself who really want to see women get their just due. And so uh, Ruth Bader Ginsburg was known for her dissents, and in large part, that is indicative of where we are in today's time. That it's sometimes what you're willing to object to that defines the fortitude and the seriousness of the fights that you take to injustice. It's not always the it's not always what you're for. Sometimes it's as important to stand up, speak out, be plain about what you're against. And she did that. And before we roll into the first episode of the season, I picked a dissent that I wanted to read from. And it was the dissent in uh, the case that largely struck down um, elements of Section 5 of the Voting Rights Act. And in part, she said, after a century's failure to fulfill the promise of the 14th and 15th Amendment, passage of the Voting Rights Act finally led to signal improvement on this front. The Justice Department estimated that in the 5 years after the Voting Rights Act's passage, almost as many blacks registered to vote in Alabama, Mississippi, Georgia, Louisiana, North Carolina, and South Carolina as in the entire century before 1965. And in assessing the overall effects of the Voting Rights Act in 2006, Congress found that significant progress has been made in eliminating first-generation barriers experienced by minority voters, including increased numbers of registered minority voters, minority voter turnout, and minority representation in Congress, state legislatures, and local elected offices. This progress is the direct result of the Voting Rights Act of 1965. On that matter of cause and effect, there can be no genuine doubt. Although the Voting Rights Act wrought dramatic changes in the realization of minority voting rights, the Act to date surely has not eliminated all vestiges of discrimination against the exercise of the franchise by minority citizens. Jurisdictions covered by the pre-clearance requirement, that's Section 5, continue to submit in large numbers proposed changes to voting laws that the Attorney General declined to approve, auguring that barriers to the minority vote would quickly resurface were the pre-clearance remedy eliminated. Congress also found that as registration and voting of minority citizens increase, other measures may be resorted to which would dilute increase in minority voting strength. Efforts to reduce the impact of minority votes, in contrast to direct attempts to block access to the ballot, are aptly described as second-generational barriers to minority voting. Second-generation barriers come in various forms. One of the blockages is racial gerrymandering. The redrawing of legislative districts in an effort to segregate the races for purposes of voting. Another is adoption of a system of at-large voting in lieu of district-by-district voting in a city which is with a sizable black minority. By switching to an at-large voting, the overall majority could control the election of each city council member, effectively eliminating the potency of the minority's votes. A similar effect could be achieved if the city engaged in discriminatory annexation by incorporating majority white areas into city limits, thereby decreasing the effect of Voting Rights Act occasioned increases in black voting. Whatever the device employed, this court has long recognized that vote dilution, when adopted with a discriminatory purpose, cuts down the right to vote as certainly as denial of access to the ballot. She spoke very articulately about the Voting Rights Act. And I think in that dissent, it was a clarion call to citizens, especially minorities, to be on guard. Those first generational barriers may have been largely overcome, but the second generational barriers are coy, they're slick, they're well crafted, and they can be effective. Those were just a few examples. So I beg you to take voting seriously. And one reason why voting matters is because of the Supreme Court. And I think in that dissent, as in many of her dissents, she wanted us to know that voting does matter. Voting matters so much that by not participating, you may abridge those hard-fought realities of expanded access to voting for minorities. And that could affect your city councils, that could affect your state legislatures, which can affect your districts, which could gerrymander yourself out of power, which ultimately would lead to a less representative democracy. So, as we get into this season, and as we get into this first episode, I ask you to do some self-examination. Ruth Bader Ginsburg is a giant, not just for women's rights and equality as an advocate and then as a justice, but for humanity. I do especially hope that we as men are as hurt and feel as much urgency as I have already seen in so many women who are already more engaged than any of us. In the same way that Thurgood Marshall was an advocate and ultimately a justice who worked to help convince the world in conjunction with all those attorneys at the NAACP, worked to persuade the country that racial equality needs deliberate steps, continuous protection, and ever evolving creativity, just as those who oppose that progress will be ever creative and ever evolving in their quest to abridge that power. So let's take urgency into this election, and I hope you enjoy the first episode of the fall season. Thank you.